Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. My name is Lindsay-Rae McIntyre, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer of Microsoft. Hopefully some of you had a chance to join the session that Mariana and Kenji and I just had on the topic of covering in the workplace and the importance of the conversation of covering as it relates to broadening the aperture on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. For me personally, I learned about covering over a decade ago, and I will say that for me, it was a game changer. Somebody who was doing the diversity and inclusion work inside the workplace and really wanting to find a way to bring others into the conversation, to try and get out of this stale paradigm that diversity and inclusion is about us or them. And I will say that Kenji's research on covering was really critical to that work. The details and the studies that have been done are gorgeously cooked in science and the neuroscience of humans, as well as the ways in which we engage at work. And you know, when you look at some of the statistics of that work, I will say that the one that people find probably the most surprising is that 45% of straight white men in that study said that they too cover in the workplace. And that was information that we hadn't had in the space prior. And then people started to get really curious about, oh, well, what is it that that population covers on? And then we started to explore new dimensions of the diversity and inclusion conversation all around the globe. Faith, age, mental well-being, mental health, disability, and more. And so for us at Microsoft, again, covering continues to be a concept and a body of research that is allowing us to really dig deep on how it is that we want to be with one another, the conditions that we want to create for one another, so that we can invent and create and build in ways that we never have before. So I'm thrilled to be able to do this Ask Me Anything session with you and to welcome Natalie to the conversation to help me understand what some of your questions are. So let's talk about it.
Thanks, Lindsay-Rae, for that added insight. So while we wait for people to get warmed up with questions in the chat, let's start with some common questions that we get. First, the topic of covering, it's a bit complicated, but I think we can all understand the desire for people to talk about this at work. Can you talk a little bit about the risks or common mistakes that can be made when people do try to talk about it?
I think that, you know, it's important for folks to understand that this isn't about us asking individuals to uncover. That is not what we are doing. Bearing your soul in the workplace in the absence of support is not going to go well. And so the ask is really for organizations to make sure that we are building organizational capability, learning, awareness, support structures, so that we can earn the trust of individuals and that we can create the conditions for them to uncover. But I think, you know, one of the things that you know, people misunderstand is that this is about an ask to uncover, and it's absolutely not.
Great, thank you. So we have another question for you. What are some ways you know of that a manager or coworker can make someone feel more included day to day at work?
You know, we talk a lot about inclusive behaviors in the workplace, and I think that for many of us, we sort of join a call and we ask the question of like, how are you doing? And we're expecting a transactional response of fine, good, great. And we don't necessarily give one another the space to say how we're really doing and actually to listen to what's coming from another person. And so one of the things that for us at Microsoft has been really critical is homing our allyship skills and behaviors, because allyship isn't a cape or an identity or a program. For us at Microsoft, it's really about that growth mindset in action and the habits that we're going to have. But to begin to try and learn and fail at allyship, we have to be willing to connect with another human being and understand from their perspective how we can most support them. And so for us at Microsoft, I think that has been a bit of a game changer, that this really is about us genuinely being invested in one another's success and thinking hard about how we sort of get the mental space to be able to do the work we want to do, knowing perfectly well that if we are covering in the ways that get in the way of our innovation, our productivity, there's no way we're going to be able to do our best work. And so I think really it's about genuine engagement and authenticity, and then giving one another the support necessary to process all that exists inside the workplace and outside the workplace, knowing that it's always going to be imperfect.
I love that reminder. I'm definitely guilty of the "how are you doing?" Fine. Move on to the next question. It's a good reminder. So here's another question for you. What do you tell someone who's worried that the focus on diversity and inclusion will leave some people out or exclude some from the conversation?
I think that this is a really critical question because if we're being honest, sometimes the conversation is set up that way. And yet we know at the core of the human experience, we all want to be seen and valued and heard, and yet saying it to be so doesn't make it so. And so the concept of covering and then the work that we've done around allyship is really about broadening the aperture so that we can help people understand the ways in which they can both benefit from the diversity and inclusion work as individuals, but also sign up to be, part of the work to help make it happen. That this isn't about the few or the many. This is about all of us. And it's going to take all of us. The ways in which diversity and inclusion has evolved over decades and in some cases, longer than decades, is a reflection of just how hard it is to make progress. But I think that, as simple as it sounds, that we need to engage sort of individually and personally, particularly in the workplace when we have a shared mission, we have shared values. And so we absolutely have common ground to be able to connect and respect one another. And we're going to have differences, but knowing that having those conversations and engaging in them is actually what can release some of the most amazing insights that is going to create the next best technology or help us think differently about the competitive landscape. And so I think, our brains tell us that when we get engaged in conversations that are challenging, that we should back off, and we just have to remind ourselves that that's important muscle, and that we can really lean in and respect one another and have those difficult conversations, and goodness can come from them.
Thank you. All such good reminders. So some people in the audience are interested in going a little deeper into how we do this at Microsoft. So a question for you. Do people managers at Microsoft have a playbook or training to be inclusive in very practical ways in team meetings?
Yes, and I will say that we've done this in a couple of different ways. For managers at Microsoft, we do have a learning path that covers sort of the totality of the basic tool sets for management, and that would of course cover material broader than diversity and inclusion, but it also covers material on diversity and inclusion, both in terms of skill sets and concepts, but also very practical ways to engage employees at a personal level. We do have diversity and inclusion as a part of our performance management system for every single employee at Microsoft. And so there's a natural way for all managers to talk to their employees about how they're expanding their accountability and their curiosity around diversity and inclusion. And then we do talk about behaviors, and we talk about them a lot in the context of COVID and hybrid work, because for so many managers, they've had to learn to manage in a different way and listen to employees in different ways and ask questions to help them and their employees really sort of figure out how best to connect with one another, talk to one another, and support one another. And so, you know, it's a collection of both learning and then pragmatic activities, exercises, discussion guides, and sometimes it's deep on a topic, and sometimes it's more general, right? Are you thoughtful of when to use video and frankly when not to use video? In this all video environment, sometimes people don't want to show what's going on in the world around them and in their space, and it takes some contracting and some communication with one another to give one another the space and grace to make those decisions and be empowered to engage in a meeting, or, you know, to understand when somebody needs to cover the home front, because so many parents have been also teaching their children or making sure that the technology works so that they can continue their education from home, or being able to give somebody the space and grace to exercise during the day, because exercise is of course critical to our mental well-being, but not super easy when we're back to back, meeting to meeting, sitting at our desks in our homes during COVID. So we try to give managers the resources they need. We know that it is the toughest job there is. And so we also talk to our managers on a regular basis to get feedback from them on what more they need that would help them be successful.
That's great. I like that. On our team, we have the freedom to say I'm having a no video meeting day. So let's circle back to basics for a moment. A question for those of us who couldn't make it to your previous session, can you discuss what covering is?
Absolutely. Covering is a concept that Kenji Yoshino, who's a professor of law and the head of the NYU Center of Diversity, Belonging, and Inclusion, coined many years ago. He's written a book on it, so you should read it for sure. But it is the concept that we as human beings downplay known elements of ourselves that are stigmatized to fit into the mainstream. And what that means is that, you know, we are a part of, and we are not hiding our identities, but we do downplay them primarily to make other people comfortable or to assimilate to the world around us. The challenge, of course, is all of the effort that we are putting into the covering activity is energy that we could be applying to creating and innovating and collaborating. And so it really has a material impact, not only at the human level, but also at the business level, because there's a tremendous amount of productivity and innovation that can be held back as a result of the tax of covering in the workplace.
So let's talk a little bit more about what can be done about that. Here's a question for you. How do you go about getting employees to open up about what they might be covering, why they feel like they need to, and how do you go about addressing that need to cover?
I think the goal that we have at Microsoft is not to be in search of asking people to uncover, but really to earning the trust and creating the psychological safety in the environment. And that is a really multi-pronged approach, right? That is making sure that we have the education to know what we're talking about. And so if you haven't taken advantage of our Inclusion Journey website, we recently released all of our 4 primary modules from our learning and development portfolio, and one of them is on covering. The others are on allyship, privilege, and unconscious bias. And not that the learning alone is good enough, because it's not, but what it does do is give us shared language and shared understanding for what it is that we're aspiring to and what it is that we want for the space and why. Because, you know, having a discussion about vulnerability and identity, and, you know, Kenji shared in the session the real gift of storytelling, if we can get to the place where that's possible. But it requires a tremendous amount for managers to lean in and express genuine care, for coworkers to be able to connect and understand and embrace and respect their peers. And it requires us as individuals to really think hard about sort of the risk and reward, because nobody's confused that uncovering is also stressful at first, right? You're really taking a chance on the space and on the environment and trusting folks. I will say at Microsoft, this has been an iterative process. We have gone slowly over the course of the last 3 years to really make sure that we are using sort of employee safety and the trust and respect that we want to last to be so. And so also on that inclusion journey website, there are so many amazing stories from employees who've been gracious to teach us and share with us and be candid with us about when we get it wrong and what that feels like, and when we get it right and what's possible when we do. So I hope you'll check those out as well.
Thank you, Lindsay-Rae. I will take a quick minute to remind everyone that our chat is open for your questions. Lindsay-Rae will try to take as many as possible during the session, so put your questions in the chat. We do have a question about allyship. I hear a lot about being an ally. That feels risky. It might be easy to say the wrong thing and to get into trouble when you're trying to help. Do you have any tips?
What I would say is welcome to the work. Allyship is, of course, inherently messy. And it's why at Microsoft we shifted allyship from a program where we could potentially risk the confusion that, you know, you can take a class and be good at it, right? That growth mindset at Microsoft has really been an incredible opportunity for us to understand that to do all of this work well, we have to be willing to take risks. We have to be willing to fail. And allyship is really growth mindset in action, that we are going to try and we are going to fail. And so one of the paradigms that we talk about is when you see something happen in a meeting or in a conversation, there are 2 things that are sort of intuitive, neither of which go well. The first is that we watch something happen and we go like, whew, hi, I'm so glad that wasn't me. And you say nothing because you're not willing to risk your social and political capital to get involved in the situation. Or the second is you're so excited to make a difference that you jump into the conversation and you really have no idea what it is that the person who was in need of allyship wanted or needed in that moment. And we call that eager allyship as opposed to informed allyship. And so at its best, we have the opportunity as allies or aspiring allies to be able to connect to other folks. So I could say like, hey, Natalie, I saw something go down in that meeting and I wasn't really sure what to do or say. And if something like that happens again, how could I be of help to you? What is it that you'd like me to do? And you might say like, please don't say anything. I just want to get through the meeting. Or you could say the next time, Lindsay-Rae, it would be really helpful if you did the following. And then I have the opportunity to be informed and help you in a way that you want to be helped. Sometimes we don't have the opportunity to ask or work with another individual because we don't know them all that well, but we see something and we want to do something about it. And so in those cases, we speak on behalf of ourselves, right? Rather than speaking on behalf of another human being. And by keeping it close to our own accountability and our own experience, we then don't risk hurting another person's feelings. But allyship is inherently flawed, and we are going to fail. And language that we've been trying on at Microsoft is, you know, for example, I'm really wanting to learn, and I'm on a learning journey as it relates to my being an aspiring ally. I'd like to have a conversation, or I'd like to engage in this part of the conversation, and I just ask that you give me a little bit of grace as I say what I'm about to say, or try what I'm about to try. Because then people know that you're practicing, and our experience at least has been that people absolutely will give you grace, but then they'll also coach you and help you learn, because there's no expectation that we're going to get it right the first time. And so this is an opportunity for us to be really open to feedback on, how did that feel? How did that go? What advice would you have for me the next time I do it, and to really take that on board. So allyship as a practice, knowing that you're going to fail. Of course, we don't get indefinite grace to keep failing the same thing over and over. So it's really important that we do listen and learn and get better. But I would encourage you to get in there and try, because you can study all day long and it's not going to help. So the practice piece is the best and most thoughtful way forward.
That's great language and framing for people to use. We've got another question here. So diversity and inclusion may not be the same for those of us who are not in the US. It feels like it's just about gender.
Yeah, I feel like I'm really fortunate in that I have had the opportunity to live and work all over the world, and I would say that diversity and inclusion is real because it's part of the human experience. We just have to be thoughtful about how. And so, you know, the conversations that we have in Australia around the Indigenous community, or the conversations that we have in China around the inclusion of people with disabilities and the LGBTQI plus community, or, you know, the ways in which in Singapore we talk about individuals who have, come from and have historical and ancestral backgrounds to China or Malaysia, and how that shows up in Singapore and in society. Or, you know, in Brazil, we talk about, you know, the Afro-Brazilian experience, and so I think there are a number of dimensions of diversity and inclusion. We just have to really challenge ourselves, and this is not a place where the legislation or the transparency of humanity is perfect yet. We're spending a lot of time in collaboration with a number of other companies working on how we think about race and ethnicity, in particular outside the United States. And countries are really thinking hard about what that conversation means and how they aspire to enable and support diverse workplaces from a racial and ethnic perspective. Of course, people with disabilities, LGBTQI plus, and gender are the most progressed outside the United States. But we even see expanded conversations around faith, socioeconomic backgrounds, as you know, the workplace and our aspiration to have more diverse and inclusive workplaces expand. So I think, you know, I am always on a learning journey about what more diversity and inclusion encompasses in markets all over the world. But it's a really global, robust discussion if you want to engage and learn about it, for sure.
Great. Thank you so much for that global perspective. I want to let the audience know we have just over 5 minutes left in our session. We have time for probably a few more questions. So here's another question from someone in the audience. Lindsay-Rae, do you have official mentorship and/or sponsorship programs at Microsoft?
We do, and I will also say this is a space that is really evolving with speed. There are, mentoring programs that get designed for a number of employees, be it, based on your career stage or based on the business unit or the geography that you work in or the industry that you're specializing in, because we want mentorship for different reasons, right? Sometimes we want mentorship for professional expertise and acumen building. Sometimes we want mentorship for leadership coaching and sort of workplace navigation insights. Sometimes we want mentorship for support as we go about doing both our work and our life. And so we talk about mentorship as sort of folks having a sort of a personal board of directors across that continuum, as opposed to having just one mentor. And then sponsorship, again, primarily is at the business unit level, as opposed to having a formal corporate program globally enterprise-wide, because sponsorship, of course, requires proximity between the sponsor and the sponsee to be effective and meaningful. And these two motions, both mentorship and sponsorship, have to be connected to your talent management process and your career development process. And so when we talk about, sort of pivoting diversity and inclusion from something off to the side to being a cultural transformation lever, it really is about threading it through the employee experience, including those talent management and career development motions, because that's how it becomes systemic and sustainable, and gives people the opportunity to invent and reimagine their mentorship and sponsorship needs over the course of their own career.
Thank you. I love that concept of the personal board of mentors. We should all have one of those. So another question for you, what do you tell people who want to keep some of this personal? Not everyone wants to bring their personal life to work.
I mean, the good news is you're in charge, right? There's nothing that says that you have to or you must, right? And so having control sit at the individual level is absolutely what we're solving for. And in the session, Kenji and I had a conversation about some of the implications of COVID and this all video all the time experience, and how that for some has been very invasive and not comfortable. And so the technology that has given people control of their spaces through blurred backgrounds or on-off features of video or chat or captioning are really critical. And so I hope that as employers and workplaces, we continue to advance the conversation, both through education and cultural transformation, so that for individuals who are covering, they can see the possibility of what would open up for them if they had the opportunity to be their authentic selves and to be supported in the workplace. But that is on us as organizations to earn that trust, individual by individual.
That's great, thank you. So we're almost at the end of our session. We have probably about a minute left. So as we wrap up, we know this can feel overwhelming. If you can give someone one tip for where to start to learn more and be more inclusive, what would you tell them?
I would say read Kenji's book on covering, because it is comprehensive, thoughtful, and really does provide both the business case and the human case for this work. For the developer community in particular, the innovation demands of the industry and the profession have never been higher. And so what is it that each of us can do to enable each and every developer to do their best work? And I happen to believe that, getting to the bottom of psychological safety and having cultures that are rich and supportive and thoughtful, and giving people the opportunity to uncover and also to build the allyship skills that we've been talking about, that they are in fact habit formation opportunities, moment to moment, meeting to meeting, and that this isn't going to be a light switch that we're going to turn on or off in the workplace, that this is going to be iterative and it's going to grow, but it gains momentum quickly once you make investments in the basics. And so I would invite you to join the conversation. If you're already a part of the work, continue to challenge yourself to grow and learn in new and different ways. And if you're somebody who's maybe had questions about, do I really want to have the conversation, or do I really want to, join the diversity and inclusion, space of work in my workplace, I would encourage you to know that our greatest desire is for you to feel included and to help us do the work as we support you to do your best work.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay-Rae, for all the insights today.
Well, thank you all so much for joining, and I hope that you have an amazing rest of Build.